On today's episode, I will be placing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the pop culture pedestal. The comic book was doing really well, and it wasn't long before Kevin and Peter started to receive lots of calls from licensing agents who wanted to represent them and turn Kevin and Peter's creation into a toy line. But for one reason or another, Kevin and Peter were never really won over by this, and no deal was ever made. That is until they met licensing agent Mark Friedman. Now, Mark Friedman had instantly fell in love with the concept of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he fought really hard to work for Kevin and Peter and bring the Turtles into the mainstream. Mark wanted a 5-year deal, but Kevin and Peter were reluctant, so they gave him 30 days to go out and bring back an offer that they couldn't refuse. And as I said, Mark really saw the potential of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and really wanted to work for them, so he accepted the offer. So Kevin and Peter sent Mark out with only 2 things to seal the deal. They gave him the very first issue of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic book with a note attached to it which read, "Go out and make me $1 million or else," along with a 4-foot foam replica of a Ninja Turtle. And off he went to make the deal of his life. But Mark soon discovered that it wasn't going to be that easy. The problem was, everyone seemed to think that the concept was laughable, that it was ridiculous. They didn't see the potential in the Ninja Turtles. Mark was turned away time and time again. No one understood the idea of the Turtles, and they didn't seem to realise how good it could be. But nevertheless, Mark persevered and tried all he could to get some kind of deal for Peter and Kevin. And of course his trying paid off when a company called Playmates Toys decided to take on board the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and produce a toy line that would definitely turn their company around. But even at this point, Playmates still had to pitch the idea to the big bosses. Another problem that stood in the way was how violent the original comic book was, so they needed to make some tweaks here and there and then present their pitch. Unfortunately, the pitch did not go well. They just couldn't seem to convince people that they were onto a winner. And so it was then decided, in order to sell these toys, it might be a good idea to have some kind of animated TV show to create a backstory for the Ninja Turtles, to cover an origin story, but without the violence and the adult tones that the comic book had, and to get this show on TV sets for kids to see whilst they ate their breakfast on a Saturday morning. And after all, it worked for He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which was originally a toy line that really needed a TV show to help sell the toys. So eventually a deal was made, and Playmates decided to pay for the cartoon to be made, and they produced the first 10 action figures, which were Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, Splinter, April, Shredder, Bebop, Rocksteady, and a lone foot soldier. And it wasn't long before the TV series found its way onto the television sets in front of kids on Saturday morning. But still, even though the cartoon was out there, Playmates still found it hard to sell to the actual retailers. You see, no one wanted to take a chance on the toys because they just seemed too ridiculous. That is until Toys R Us took a chance and ordered a shipment of the figures. And it would seem that the staff at Toys R Us could not get these figures on the shelves quick enough. As soon as these figures hit the shelves, they just sold. They sold like hotcakes. And of course, it wasn't long before Toys R Us ordered more, and this time the order was considerably bigger. Turtle Mania had truly begun. The cartoon was on every child's TV set, and it was bringing in great ratings, so it absolutely dominated kids' TV. The action figure line was selling almost too fast to meet demand, and the next logical step was to design new characters, new vehicles and accessories, clothing, backpacks, lunchboxes, you name it, they did it. And I, of course, like everyone else, I absolutely adored the cartoon. I watched the cartoon every chance I could get. Whenever it was on TV, I was there in front of the TV watching it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the cartoon TV series now before we go any further. So, from the moment the cartoon actually begins, as a child, you know it's something special. The theme tune, for starters, was still, and probably is, one of the most catchy, recognisable TV intros ever produced for a kids' TV show. The gentleman who was actually responsible for coming up with the theme tune for the Ninja Turtles, the guy who actually wrote it, and I think he actually sung it, was a man named Chuck Lorre. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, well, that's probably because Chuck Lorre is actually responsible for some of the biggest TV shows we've had. These include Grace Under Fire, Sybil, 2.5 Men, and probably his biggest hit of all time, The Big Bang Theory. And it's not only the theme tune that is amazing, the animation in the actual intro is really high standard, it's fluid, and it's beautiful to watch. And this is also true about the first 5 episodes that aired in 1987. Now, the 5 initial episodes that we got to sell the toys, they always seem to me to be animated to a much higher standard than the episodes that would follow. Or so it seemed to me anyway. The animation and the shading just look superior in some way to the later seasons. This may be due to the animation director who worked on these initial 5 episodes, and I don't think he was brought back to do the rest of the cartoons. The gentleman's name was, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I know, but I'll give it a go, Yoshikatsu Kazai. And I presume he was given a decent budget for the initial 5 episodes, and that's why they came out looking so sweet. Now, as the series went on, for the most part, the characters were voiced by the following. Leonardo was voiced by Cam Clarke, Donatello by Barry Gordon, Michelangelo by Townsend Coleman, Raphael by Rob Paulson, who would also go on to voice Donatello in the 2012 CGI animated series. Splinter was voiced by Peter Renaday, April by Renee Jacobs, Shredder by James Avery, who was Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Krang by Pat Fraley. The show aired on December the 28th, 1987. The TV show needed to be changed considerably from the original dark and gritty comics to be more child-friendly. One of the big changes that was made was to the Turtles. Instead of them being violent and dark, the Turtles needed to have slightly different personalities. They become more comedic, silly and wacky. They started to use more catchphrases like cowabunga, turtle power, radical, tubular, and so on. And they also developed a fascination with pizza, which wasn't in the original comics. And the same also applied for other characters. Take Shredder, for instance. He was still the bad guy, he was still evil, but he was nowhere near the same character as he was in the comic. April was no longer a lab assistant. In this, she was now a reporter for Channel 6 News. And another big change was Master Splinter's backstory. It differed massively from the comic books. And as I mentioned before, Splinter's origin story in the 1987 cartoon is the one that I actually prefer. So let me just walk you through the first couple of episodes of the Ninja Turtles cartoon. The first episode starts with April O'Neil reporting on crimes in the city that seem to be committed by groups of ninjas. When April finishes her report, she is confronted by a gang of thugs and chased into the sewers of all places. Luckily for her, she is saved by the Ninja Turtles that make easy work of the thugs from the shadows. When the fight is over, April asks her heroes to step into the light, and they do so. And when the Turtles are fully revealed for the first time, we can see a few differences compared to the comics. First of all, they look more easy in the eye, almost cute I suppose compared to the comic books. Here's a few of the main changes that were made. First of all, they all had initials written onto the belt buckles as supposed to tell them apart. And then there's the Turtles' bandanas, the masks. As I said in the comics, they were all red, but in this new cartoon version, they had all been given a coloured bandana and elbow and knee pads. This was done so children could tell them apart, and I suppose to sell more toys. You can't have 4 Ninja Turtles that all look the same because they just won't sell, but if you put a different coloured headband on each turtle figure, then you have to have a collection of each one. So I'm sure, as you all know, Leonardo wore blue, Mikey wore orange, Donnie wore purple, and Raphael stayed in the red colour. Now back to the story. April faints and the Turtles take her back to their lair. When she awakes, she meets Splinter and he begins to tell her the origin story. Now in the comics, Splinter was a pet rat before he was mutated and belonged to Hamato Yoshi, his owner. Now in the cartoon version, Splinter is Hamato Yoshi. There's no Tang Shen and there's no Oroko Nagi. There's just Hamato Yoshi and Oroko Saki, who is of course the Shredder. Now Hamato Yoshi and Oroko Saki are both members of the ninja clan The Foot, which operated in Japan. Now in the cartoon, Hamato Yoshi was actually a teacher of the Foot clan, and Oroko Saki Shredder was insanely jealous of him and he wanted nothing more but to get rid of Hamato Yoshi. So one day when the Grand Master paid a visit, all members of the clan were expected to bow before their master and show respect. But just before Hamato Yoshi was supposed to bow, Oroko Saki made his move and pinned the back of Yoshi's robes to the wall with a dagger. When Yoshi failed to bow, it was seen as an insult, and then when he pulled the dagger out from the wall, it looked as though Yoshi planned to kill the master of the clan and was thrown out, and he fled to New York, where he lived in the sewers as a homeless man among the rats. One day, a young boy was walking past on street level and dropped his ball of baby turtles down the drain, and Yoshi found them and cared for them. Meanwhile in Japan, Oroko Saki The Shredder had taken over the Foot Clan and used them for his own criminal interests. Back in New York, Splinter awoke one day to find the Turtles crawling around in purple goo, a mutagen. No canister in this version, it just appeared from a sewer pipe. Now, because the Turtles had last been in contact with Yoshi, the Turtles became half human, half turtle. But Splinter had last been in contact with the rats, so this made him half man, half rat. And then the story goes on to tell how he named them from his Renaissance painter's art book, and he taught them all ninjutsu. And that is the origin story of the cartoon in a nutshell. Now, as the cartoon went on, we discovered that Saki had come to New York and was now known as the Shredder. We saw the creation of Bebop and Rocksteady, and we were also introduced to Krang, the alien brain with a face from Dimension X, who it was seen was Shredder's boss. Now, there was actually a similar version of Krang which was in the original comic books, but it wasn't actually as one character, but as a race of Krangs. And these were like alien brain-like creatures called Utroms. Back to the cartoon, Krang needs Shredder to build him a body so he can move about more freely and become an actual weapon. The body Shredder builds is a massive Frankenstein monster-like creation. In fact, they actually parody "It's Alive" line from the movie. Now, when it comes to the actual body that Shredder builds, it's very strange to look at. The best way I can describe it is blubbery. Krang is placed into a compartment in the stomach where he can control the body, and he also has the ability to grow massively. And I also believe that Peter and Kevin actually hated the design of this Krang body. They actually hated it so much, but it was too late. It was already animated and put into the show. Rocksteady and Bebop were also introduced into the 5-part mini-season. Two of the original thugs at the beginning in episode 1 who attacked April, and they were later mutated into a warthog and a rhino to help fight the Turtles, although they were not the smartest villains in the world, often messing up and making mistakes. Now, Bebop and Rocksteady were not originally in the comic books, although it was Peter Laird who created the characters especially for the TV series, and it wouldn't be long before we would see Bebop and Rocksteady actually join the comic books and become fan favourites. Now, as far as Shredder, we have covered his origin story in the original comic and cartoon, but what about the Shredder's personality in the show? Well, in the comic, he uses the Foot Clan for drug smuggling, selling weapons and assassinations, and was a ruthless murderer, a no-nonsense villain. And actually, in the initial 5 episodes that were released for Season 1, Shredder is actually quite cunning and dangerous. However, as the series went on, Shredder's personality did seem to change a little bit. He was still evil, but he did always seem to fail to defeat the Turtles, although he did at times seem to be the better fighter. As soon as he was beaten in the fight, he would run off like a coward, and it wasn't unusual to see him have a tantrum if things weren't going his way. Quite a change from the violent killer in the comic books. And then we have the Ninja Turtles themselves, whose characters had changed a little since their comic book origins. Michelangelo, for instance, in the comic books, he was more easygoing than his brothers, but also with a serious tone and ready to fight. However, in the cartoon, he was more fun-loving, and given a bigger role, he was also known as a party dude. In fact, he was even given the title as the party dude in the main theme. Mikey also had a weakness for pizza, even though all of the other Turtles had a weakness for pizza too, but they didn't seem to have as much of a weakness for pizza as Mikey did. He loved to joke around, he spoke with a surfer dude slang, and was constantly used in the show for constant comic relief. And it is said that the voice actor was responsible for the Cowabunga catchphrase, which wasn't actually scripted. And then we have Leonardo, who in the comic, he isn't actually referred to as a leader at first, but always led his brothers into battle, and is said to be the more skillful turtle and highly disciplined. Now, in the cartoon, he is more or likely the same. It does actually say it right there in the theme song, Leonardo is the leader. In the cartoon, he can come across as bossy, and this can annoy his brothers from time to time. He is sometimes portrayed as the goody two-shoes, and he can also be the teacher's pet, but it has been proven in some episodes that the Turtles rely on him a lot for his leadership skills. And then we have Donatello. Now, in the comics, Donnie is actually portrayed as the second in command, and was quite the handyman. He was quite good at fixing things In fact, in the early episodes of the comic books, there's a storyline where they have to retreat to a farmhouse, quite similar to the movie, which we'll get onto later. And he was actually seen around the farmhouse fixing many different items, such as a farmhouse boiler, and he also builds a windmill and a water wheel to provide electricity. Now, in the cartoon, he's viewed as a tech geek genius who can pretty much make anything he puts his mind to. He builds the turtle wagon, he builds a blimp, he also builds the turtle comms, the walkie-talkies that they use, and he can also invent portals to other dimensions as well as many other out-of-this-world creations that nicely move the plot along in the cartoon. And the last turtle is Raphael, and in the comic, Raphael is a big hothead, always first to fight and prone to anger. He is also the most violent of the four. But in the cartoon, Raphael's personality is extremely different than any other version released since. In the theme tune, he is introduced as a cool but rude turtle, and he's the most sarcastic of all his brothers, and is quick to poke fun, and his violent tendencies are completely toned down, and he is used a lot for comic relief, along with his brother Michelangelo. And another character I'd like to talk about is Casey Jones. Now, he wasn't actually in the first 5 episodes, but I think he is an important character to talk about when it comes to the 1987 series. Now, in the comics, Casey Jones is actually the hot-head vigilante, actually quite similar to Raphael in many ways, who likes to dispense his own kind of justice on the criminals. And when it actually comes to the cartoon, I wouldn't actually say they toned him down, I said they actually turned it up a notch. In the cartoon, Casey Jones is a muscle-bound, unhinged vigilante who wears a hockey mask, like in the comics. But in the cartoons, the relationship between him and the Turtles is different. Instead of being a friend of the Turtles, which he is a friend of the Turtles, but he is more of a nuisance, and the Turtles often had to calm him down. It's actually funny watching these episodes. As a kid, I didn't realise this, but the voice actor for Casey Jones sounds a lot like a parody of Clint Eastwood.
Go ahead, take my night. Catch you on the slopes. Go ahead, make my day.
Now, as I said, Casey Jones didn't play such a central role in the cartoons as he did in the comics, and he only actually appeared in 5 episodes out of the 193 that actually aired on the television. And next I want to mention the differences of the Foot Clan between the comic and the cartoon, because I feel it will segue nicely into what I want to discuss next, which is the violence that is depicted in the show. In the comic, the Foot Clan are the most feared clan of warriors in Japan, skilled and dangerous, and were particularly good at assassinations. In the cartoon, they were changed considerably. Obviously, they can't have assassinations in cartoons. Although in the cartoon, the Shredder does actually bring Foot Clan members over from Japan, it is presumed that somewhere between coming to the US and meeting the Turtles, Krang must have created his own robotic Foot Clan. In episode 1 of the cartoon, it seems as though the Turtles are actually holding back when they are first confronted by the Foot. But as soon as they discover that they are robots, they seem to be more happy with this revelation and unleash their weapons on the Foot, easily beating them, and throughout the series, the Foot never really pose much of a threat and are easily beaten. Now, the reason the Foot were robots was obvious. It's so that the Turtles had an excuse to use their weapons. After all, you couldn't use your weapons to stab a living villain on a kids' TV show. But robots are fine. In fact, the Turtles' weapons were never actually used to cause harm. Instead, they were used to help them in different ways, such as cutting a net to fall on the enemy, or throw the weapon to disable a trap, or something of that sort. But even though the cartoon was really kid-friendly, it would seem that some countries were still not convinced and went on to heavily edit some of the action scenes, especially the UK. Now, in the UK at the time, the word ninja was taken out of the title and was replaced with the word hero, as it was thought the word ninja was far too violent a word to have in the title of a cartoon in the UK. So the cartoon in the UK was called Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. And throughout my childhood, that's how I knew it. Also, any scene of Michelangelo using his nunchucks were also cut from the cartoon, because at the time, nunchucks were also illegal in the UK. Also, the intro was heavily cut, removing a few Mikey shots with his nunchucks. Another thing removed from the main theme tune was the word ninja, just as it was removed from the titles, and the word hero was inserted into the theme tune. And the word ninja was also replaced with the word hero on all merchandise released in the UK. Along with the nunchucks, they were also removed from all merchandise, including early video games. It wasn't actually until season 4 when the people responsible for making these cartoons actually addressed the issue of the censorship, and they started to give Michelangelo a grappling hook to fight with instead of the nunchucks to avoid any messy editing done by TV networks. And then the cartoon kept the silly, wacky, fun tone for many seasons to come. That is until season 8. At the time, the X-Men cartoon was doing very well, and it was a much darker, serious series than the Turtles was. So from season 8, the Turtles cartoon had a big change, visually and story-wise. Although still in the same timeline as all the other episodes that came before it, the episodes that came after it became darker, and it got a brand new title sequence and song. The title sequence had clips from the 1990 movie included in it. The design of the turtles also changed. They looked less child-friendly and more meaner, and the stakes were higher. This was no longer a cartoon where the bad guys constantly failed. In one episode, Shredder actually succeeds at blowing up the Channel 6 news building and reducing it to rubble. And I think if I remember rightly, that's how that episode actually ended, on a somber note rather than a happy one. Now, the final 3 seasons of the Turtles cartoon are known as the Red Sky episodes, and this is due to the changes in the colour of the sky in the cartoon, which were all now coloured a dark, moody red. A bit like the New Adventures of Batman, they had a similar colour palette as well for their episodes. Now, whilst we're talking about the cartoons, and before we move away from the cartoons, I think it's worth mentioning that there was a second comic book that was started, and it was more child-friendly and followed the cartoons more closely, but diverged by issue 5. The comic series was known as the Archie Comics run, and it ran from 1988 to 1995 and had 72 issues as well as annuals. And now back to the cartoon, it actually ran for an amazing 10 seasons before it actually came to an end. The cartoon went on to be the longest running cartoon TV series of all time. That was until a few years later when it was beaten by The Simpsons. And so the last episode of the 1987 Ninja Turtle cartoon run ended on the 2nd of November 1996. But something that I failed to mention happened in 1990 during the height of the cartoon, when it was decided that the world would be treated to a full-length, live-action Ninja Turtles movie. Until then, take care, and I'll see you next time, dudes and dudettes. See you soon.